From losing one of their best fighters because of a lazy contract deal, to trading Mighty Mouse for a dirty fighter that quit 2 years after getting signed, these are the reasons why the UFC is dying. Starting with how they recently lost one of their best fighters, Francis Ngannou, all because of a lousy contract deal. Francis spilled the beans on the MMA Hour about what went down during the negotiations. He had some casual demands, like a 3-fight deal, waiving those pesky extension clauses, and even health insurance for all fighters. He mentioned how there were fighters at the bottom who couldn't afford health insurance at all, and it's very dangerous for them. But the UFC didn't give him what he asked for, and now Francis is a free agent. He made it clear how unhappy he was with the situation, and said that contract made him feel like he wasn't free. He said he didn't have any rights under that contract, and basically had to hand over all his power to the UFC. So can you blame the guy for walking away? Dana White, always ready to defend his organization, had the audacity to clap back and say that Francis was looking for more money to fight weaker opponents. Francis laughed that off, saying he did want more money, but he wasn't interested in facing lesser competition. In fact, he said he'd love to compete in boxing, even against top stars like Tyson Fury and Anthony Joshua. During the negotiations, Francis also called for in-cage sponsorships, and the UFC did agree to the idea of a 3-fight contract because Francis's plan was to complete those fights in less than 15 months. He wanted to take on stars like Jon Jones and the heavyweight legend Stipe Miocic. But want to know what the sticking point was? The UFC wouldn't waive its 1-year matching rights clause or exclusive negotiating window, and Francis wasn't okay with that. White said he offered Francis a deal that would make him the highest paid heavyweight in UFC history, but Ngannou felt like the UFC was only focused on the money, when he had other considerations too. He said all he wanted was some respect and doesn't want the UFC deciding what he's gonna do, and Dana White pretty much proved Francis's point with the way he reacted after the whole thing went down. He's been going nuts lately, calling out Tyson Fury to step into the octagon and fight Jon Jones. But Fury, the heavyweight boxing champ, made it clear that he ain't stepping foot inside a UFC cage. Fair enough, right? But after a recent UFC event featuring Kai Kara France and Amir Albazi, White went at it again and challenged Fury once more to fight Jones in the UFC, and that move didn't sit well with a lot of fans. Even Jake Paul joined in on the action and called out White's hypocrisy, saying that Dana sits there talking about "I don't do gimmick fights," and then does this to steal away attention from Francis joining PFL, even though he didn't pay Floyd the last time that happened and paid Conor instead. Shots fired, and Francis himself didn't hold back either, and tweeted about how he's down to fight Fury instead. But Dana shot back and said he figured out how to pay Floyd, so he'll figure out how to pay Tyson too. But UFC fans ain't buying it, and they're calling him a liar, saying he had nothing to do with paying Mayweather, and he just piggybacked off McGregor's success and took a cut of his money. They asked White to focus on paying his own fighters before he figures out how he's gonna be paying Fury, because they've had enough of the mistreatment UFC fighters go through for money, and White's made it clear that he doesn't care at all. The UFC rakes in insane amounts from pay-per-view buys, sponsorships, and all that stuff, but do the fighters see a fair share of that dough? Not even close. Dana White was asked about it during his interview with GQ, but he brushed it off like it was no big deal. He straight up said that fighters always want to make more money, and boxing's been destroyed because of it, and that's why he's never gonna pay his MMA fighters more.
I tried to make the fight. We offered Fedor Emelianenko an ungodly amount of money, and they didn't want the fight. I don't know what to tell you.
The UFC fighters get a cut from the pay-per-view buys and some of the revenue, but it's spread out amongst all the fighters. That's peanuts compared to what other athletes in different sports leagues make. I'm talking NFL, NBA, and NHL players who make 48 to 50% of their sports revenue, while UFC fighters are lucky if they even get 20%. The UFC pay scale is weirdly similar to WWE, and we all know how WWE has been accused of lowballing its employees before. Fans don't know why more UFC fighters haven't jumped to boxing already. The paydays are way bigger, and Jon Jones, one of the all-time greats in MMA history, spoke up about it back in 2020. He confirmed on Twitter that he was going to give up his UFC title that year because of a huge pay dispute, and when one of Jones's followers said that he was hurting himself more than the UFC, he fired back with a truth bomb, saying that he hurts himself every time he walks into a fight and takes a punch to the head, knowing his pay isn't worth it anymore. At the time, Jones had his eyes set on a heavyweight showdown with Francis Ngannou Ngannou, but the UFC didn't want to cough up enough money to make the fight happen. Yeah, Dana said that Jones was asking for crazy money, and he wasn't ready to offer Jones that much. He straight up lowballed one of the UFC's best fighters, and fans could tell where Dana's priorities lie, because Jon Jones is a legend. He's dominated the light heavyweight division, so you'd think the UFC would treat him like the superstar he is, right? Wrong. Dana called Jones's payment expectations crazy, but fans said it was a fair paycheck because Jones is a legend. So when you see someone like him speaking out about being underpaid, it's a clear sign that the UFC's dying. In fact, he wasn't the only fighter in the league who's called out the UFC. Ben Askren's always had crazy beef with Dana White, especially after his stint in Bellator ended, and negotiations with the UFC didn't exactly go smoothly. White told MMA Junkie that Askren needed to prove himself against tougher opponents, even though Askren was a top 10 welterweight at the time, and the UFC roster was overflowing with fighters who barely had any professional experience. But the drama didn't stop there. Dana had some strong choice of words for Askren, calling him the most boring fighter in MMA history in one of his tweets. Now, let's take a step back and look at the bigger picture. Dana's always been a controversial figure, and some fans might find his no-filter attitude refreshing, but let's face it, that act got old real quick. The guy never changes his tune, so when you're trying to expand internationally and attract new fans, you can't have a president who's constantly stirring up trouble. People want to see a professional. The crazy part was that White still went ahead and signed Ben, even after all the bad blood between them. But Ben left the UFC just 2 years after signing with them, even though he was traded for one of their best, Demetrius Johnson, who you might know as Mighty Mouse. This is the guy who holds the record for the most consecutive UFC title defenses, even though from the UFC's perspective, when Mighty Mouse was around, he wasn't exactly breaking pay-per-view records, despite being dominant as hell. So Johnson's decision to leave the UFC wasn't just a spur-of-the-moment thing. Nah, he had some serious issues with the promotion, especially when it came to getting paid and pay-per-view points. Even though Mighty Mouse was a beast in his division, he felt like the UFC didn't do enough to market him and make him the superstar he knew he could be. So Dana went ahead and fumbled the bag with one of his hardest fighters, only for the fighter he traded to end up retiring from the UFC just 2 years later. But you know what? For Johnson, it ended up going pretty well, and that's a slap to Dana's face. Because at first, it seemed like the UFC hit the jackpot with Ben, an undefeated Olympic wrestler, stepping into the octagon and going toe-to-toe with Robbie Lawler at UFC 235 and coming out with a win. But Askren didn't just bring his mat skills to the UFC, he also brought his trash-talking game too, and that instantly made him a star, because playing dirty is the only way you can rise up in the UFC these days. And if you're a fighter who wants to keep it clean and compete with honor, it's like the UFC has a hard time giving you the spotlight you deserve. But here's the kicker. All of this came back to Dana White after Jorge Masvidal knocked Askren out during a fight in just 5 seconds with that epic flying knee knockout that broke records. Askren retired shortly after, while Johnson had just become the one flyweight champion and said he has no plans of hanging up his gloves anytime soon. So, from trading Mighty Mouse for a dirty fighter that quit 2 years after getting signed, to losing one of their best fighters because of a lazy contract deal, those were the reasons why the UFC is dying.